When looking at our button design, we can see that there is an active and an inactive state. One of the two has to be the default, and it makes more sense to make the inactive state the default state, which means that we're going to style the button to look as if it is inactive, and only once we're happy with that style are we going to concern ourselves with making the active state around the buttons. In the browser, let me zoom in a bit here, you can see here that here's my unstyled button, and here is a button style that demonstrates the inactive state for us. Now you can see that the icon is sitting a little bit to the top. There's a bit of space at the bottom, so it's not perfectly equal, so that's one problem that we want to fix. And then the second problem is just the general button sizing. If you look at the button that I'm highlighting here, it's a little bit higher in the design than what it is actually just standard. So on the right hand side you can see the button style that I've applied to this button. So I've increased the height to 80%. I took the border away, I made the background transparent, and I just gave it a bit of padding at the top just to push that icon down a little bit, because both of these icons have the same problem, and so I can have a generic style that actually deals with them both. If I give this thing a background of silver, I can just see the dimensions around that, and that's good. Now you'll see that I don't have any border radiuses and stuff on there, even though the design requires it, because when the background is transparent, why bother? When we deal with the active state, then we'll deal with that. So this over here is my button styling for the default button, and then when we add the active state to it, then it will look a little bit different. So let's just copy that over. Currently I don't have any styling for the button, so I'll add it in here. So I can say for my collection, when I have a button, I want it to have these properties to it. I only have those two buttons, so it'll only affect those two items. Let's save it and just make sure that it looks right still in the browser. Looking at it in the browser, the alignment looks pretty good. The buttons look like they are in appropriate state. They have a pretty good size. I think we're ready to go and add the state to it. The important thing to notice now is I'm not actually going to write any code to do the state. So I'm going to make the state styling, and then I'm going to apply the styling to the button, make sure that that's correct first, and then we'll worry about toggling the state at a later stage. So let's get the styling done. It is important to notice these buttons are stateful, so they are either in a pressed or a not pressed state, because they essentially toggle buttons. And when we do the toggle, we can see that if the button is pressed, it has this blue background and the SVG is white. So to do that, there is an attribute called aria pressed, which is used for web accessibility to show you that this button is in a pressed state. So if we say that this button is pressed, we can actually use this aria attribute for our styling to make the appropriate changes to it. So here I have my prefix, and then I say any item that is pressed should have a background, which is our blue color, and we've added that as a CSS variable, but the fill we want to make white. Looking at it in our browser, we can see that the button that we added that press state to true on is got that blue now, and if we change this value to false, you'll see that it's now off. And we can also go to this button and say aria dash pressed is equal to true, and now that's blue and the icon is white. So that's perfect. The only thing that's missing is that these corners here should be rounded, and in this case here, if this button is pressed, then these corners should be rounded. And to do that, we are going to have a class that we assign to the buttons that will facilitate that for us. So let's go and do that now. Okay, so here's my buttons. I'm going to add a class per rounded state, because as you can see in the design, in this case it's on the right hand side, in this case it's the left hand side, so there's actually going to be a little bit of toggling there. So let's just say that the class here is called round-left, and in this case we'll say that that is called round right, and then we're going to add the borders for that. Here are two classes, the one for rounded left and one for rounded right. Because we want uniformity on it, and just from a maintainability perspective, we made the rounded a variable. It's 5 pixels, and we set the border radius individually. So for rounded left, we round the top left and the bottom left hand corners. So you always work from top left, top right, bottom left. And on the right hand corners, we do the opposite. So we make the top right and the bottom right rounded, and we leave the edges. Let's go see what it looks like in the browser. We had the first button ARIA pressed default to true, and as you can see, we've got that nice round border going on here. And if we just quickly copy this value here, and we can add it to the bottom button as well, you can now see that as soon as the ARIA pressed is true, our styling appears. Now we're actually in a position where we can start putting some logic in there to say, when I click on this button, I want it to be pressed. And for that, we're going to use the CRS binding engine.